Well, the Constitutional Court has set aside the interim interdict which had prevented the South African National Roads Agency from levying tolls on certain Gauteng freeways. The court says it had set aside the interim interdict because it failed to consider the separation of powers of different arms of government. And joining us for more is Wayne Duvenage. He's a chairperson of OUTA. Thanks so much, Wayne, for joining us this afternoon.
Pleasure.
Well, just ahead of getting into this interview, you said you're not despondent but disappointed with the kind of outcome that's been tabled. What is scary stuff is that SANRAL has indicated it would be ready to start, tolling Gauteng drivers in about 4 weeks' time.
Well, I think that remains to be seen. The tariffs still need to be published. There are the notice around exemption orders, regulations relating to the SANRAL police that were out for comment and haven't been finalised and so forth. So this is not like switching a light switch and starting tolling in the next couple of weeks. And if they do get it up and running within 4 weeks, I said within 2 weeks in the Constitutional Court a month ago. So now it's 4 weeks.
Wayne,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I thought you'd finished that answer, but let me just ask this question quickly. I'm a legal and political agnostic. When I see the reason that it's been set aside is because it failed to consider the separation of powers of different arms of government, I don't understand what that means. I mean, how many arms of government are involved in this process?
Well, certainly Cabinet is what they're referring to, I think, and that is pertains to if Cabinet needs to make its decisions, the courts should be careful not to intervene with those decisions from an interdicting point of view. It doesn't mean to say that we cannot challenge, that society cannot challenge government in the high courts and review the decisions made. But what they were saying is the judge erred in interdicting it until that review is heard. So that's the main crux of this matter. They're saying that government should be allowed to continue with its decisions, even though those decisions are flawed from time to time, unless, of course, society can bring across compelling arguments that there is fraud or corruption involved, or that the decision is so irrational. And we're saying that that decision is irrational, that it is unreasonable, and that's what we'll have to prove in the High Court. So there's that grey area that we need to challenge.
So as we progress towards that stage of taking things to the High Court in November, how confident are you that this is an initiative that will not get the green light?
Well, what the initiative to stop it? No, we believe our case is very strong. We're not saying that we don't want to pay for the roads. We're saying that government is erring in the efficiency of using taxpayers' money for infrastructure upgrading. We know that taxpayers have to pay for this ultimately, but to go and introduce a system that costs an exorbitant 1.7 billion rand a year just to collect the money, not to pay for the roads yet, we could have built 2 GFIPs. Is what we're saying, Gauteng freeway systems over 20 years if you take that money in as well. That is irrational. That is very heavy on the pockets of a very stretched taxpayer at the moment, and that is ultimately the crux of our case, plus the fact that the consultation process was extremely flawed.
Wayne, is there a case here that there's too many vested interests? I mean, if you look at the extraordinary amount of infrastructure that's put in place. In Cape Town, we sort of put our heads in the sand and we go up there and we sort of snicker when we go from the airport towards Sandton and see all these gantries everywhere. But obviously it's incredibly serious. But what I'm saying is there are powers and wheels within wheels that are saying we have to go ahead with this. Are you saying that you would like it to go ahead but in a moderated format and a more reasonable format for the motorist who is going to be hit hardest, of course?
Well, we're saying that you can't half e-toll. If you introduce e-tolling, you've got to go the full gambit, because you've got to collect the money to pay for the collection process as well as the road infrastructure. And that is what we're questioning. So we're not saying that it's we don't want to pay for our roads. But government, if SANRAL had have gone through the process properly and engaged and consulted with businesses, with the public, they would have found that there was going to be a large amount of resistance. Now, this is the ultimate challenge in this process, and that is, does the public participate? If the public doesn't participate in this process, then they have a huge mountain to climb. Then I think that e-tolling will fail. And that ultimately, I think, is the crux of the matter.
So no one's really raised the issue regarding, the benefits that this project has brought to the road users of Gauteng. It therefore cannot be correct to say that the project was ill-conceived. That's the bottom line. It's execution that's the problem. So when it comes down to it, I mean, there's a lot of doubt on government's transport policy strategy right now. Is that clear enough? And what steps do we need to start taking to actually remedy this?
Well, I think what steps we need to take, what government needs to take actually, is to be far more consultative. I think it's time that the Department of Transport, the Minister of Transport, gets all stakeholders, the Road Freight Association, the car rental companies, the AA, there are a number of players and listens, because this is not what's happened up until now. We want our road infrastructure sorted out, the 150 billion rand backlog. It has to be sorted quickly. We've got new highways to build, and we just need to be part of that process, because we can give fantastic input, great input, constructive input that's going to help this infrastructure go ahead with the least waste of money, taxpayers' money, as possible. That's ultimately what we're asking for.
Wayne, when the miners want a wage increase, they go to, they have a certain process that they follow. Is there any way that there could be any mass action by motorists, or is the system, should it go ahead? I mean, you're obviously fighting for it not to go ahead, but should it go ahead? Is there anything that the motorists can do en masse in order to make it sort of ungovernable, if you like?
Well, I think that was SANRAL's biggest concern before the tolling was going to be launched in April. And that's why they brought up these exorbitant punitive rates, 3 times the normal rate, in order to try and force people to take up the tags. Because what public was saying was, we're not going to tag, and that is their right. And that ultimately is what you're talking about. The mass action from the public is one of, if you're not going to participate, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to enforce this? And I think that is the ultimate issue that has to be transcended by SANRAL, is when the public say, sorry, this is one tax too far, we're not going to participate, now you come and fetch the money from me.
What impact do you see this entire process having in terms of decisions being taken like these in other provinces, like in Cape Town, where for now Lindsay sits lucky?
Well, you cannot prejudice one city over another. There cannot be discrimination. So you can bet your bottom dollar that if they are successful here, e-tolling will be rolled out around the country. You just cannot have it in one city. Certainly not in the city that puts more money into the national fiscus or region than it receives back. We put in about 400 billion rand. We get back around about 100 billion. I'm really being, those are high level numbers. So we are funding roads and infrastructure upgrades and clinics and hospitals and schools around the country. The more productive this region is, the more productive South Africa is. So we ultimately have always said that Gauteng has more than paid for its freeway upgrade.